my name's Peg Ritenour. I'm Vice President of Legal Services here at the Ohio Association of Realtors. One of my duties here at OAR is to staff our legal assistance hotline, which is available to brokers and managers. Over the years, one of the areas in which we always consistently receive a high number of questions deals with disputes between brokerages over commissions. Let me give you an example of a type of question we receive often. Let's say you have a call from a listing broker who says that I have a listing agent who was contacted by a buyer about a property, provided some information to that buyer, showed that buyer the property. They then didn't hear anything from the buyer for a few days, and lo and behold, a few days later or a week later, an offer to purchase is received from a cooperating brokerage, and the offer is written by that exact same buyer who the listing agent has already shown the property to. So the question we usually get from the listing broker is, do I have to pay that other broker the compensation that I offered in the MLS to buyer brokers, or am I entitled to retain that part of the commission because my agent, the listing agent, was the first person to show that property to the buyer? This type of dispute is usually going to be handled through the arbitration process at your local board, unless, of course, the two brokerages can work it out between themselves. But if those brokers aren't able to do that, at your local board there is an arbitration process. And when realtors join their local board of realtors, they agree to be bound by arbitration. So what would an arbitration panel look for in this type of a hearing that would be held between two brokerages who are both claiming that they should be entitled to that buyer-broker compensation offered in the MLS? Well, when that property was put in the MLS, the compensation that is offered is only offered to a realtor who can demonstrate that they are the procuring cause of that sale. So procuring cause is going to be the issue that's going to be looked at by that arbitration panel. Well, what is procuring cause? What does that mean? Well, there are a lot of different legal definitions of procuring cause, but basically what it comes down to is that a brokerage will be found to be the procuring cause if they can establish that they were the entity that put into motion that series of events that without interruption resulted in that buyer deciding to purchase the property in question. Many realtors, when they call me, will say, well, isn't it the person that showed the property? And they will rely upon a term that I think has been around for years, referred to as the threshold rule. And some brokers believe that if you are the first person to take that buyer over the threshold to show them the property, that that automatically makes you the procuring cause. I've had other brokers tell me, well, isn't it true that if you're the one that gets the buyer to write the offer, gets their name, signed on that offer to purchase, that automatically makes you the procuring cause? And neither of those are true. There is no threshold rule. There is no rule that says that just because you get the buyer in on paper and to sign the contract that automatically makes you the procuring cause. If there was a rule like that, it would result in some probably unfair outcomes in cases. So let's say, for example, a buyer comes into an open house, they go over the threshold, but the listing agent who's staffing that open house is busy with other buyers, doesn't have time to talk with them, never contacts them as a result of them signing the registry at the open house, and never gets back to them. The buyer contacts another buyer's agent and works with that buyer's agent. They help them with financing, answer their questions, provide all the information they need to decide to buy that property. In that instance, a threshold rule would be unfair because that listing agent did really nothing other than put an open house sign in the yard and get the buyer to come to the open house. On the other hand, you could also have an unfair result if it was just the person who wrote the contract. Let's say you have a listing agent who does hold an open house. The buyer comes into the open house. They talk with them at the open house. They stay after the open house. They schedule some showings with them afterwards, get them all the information that they need. Those buyers are almost ready to write the offer when they find out that their cousin just got their real estate license and they decide to give them the first deal by writing through them. That would not be a fair outcome if you had a rule that said whoever writes the contract is the procuring cause. So neither of those are going to be a factor that will in and of itself make somebody the procuring cause. So what does make somebody the procuring cause? What are the factors that a panel is going to look at? Well, they're going to look at the entire series of events. The first thing they're going to look at is who did introduce the buyer to the property? Who got the buyer interested in that property, got them to see it, whether it was at an open house or a scheduled showing? Who introduced the property to the buyer? The second factor they're going to look at is who cultivated that buyer, who followed up with that buyer. For example, you may have a listing agent who got them into the open house, talked to them at the open house, but never got back to them on their questions, etc. But another agent did. So who really followed up with the buyer, who answered their questions, got them the information they needed, helped them with financing, and did all the other steps that are involved after a buyer first sees a property. The next thing that the panel is going to focus on is, why did the buyer go from working with the first agent, maybe seeing the property through the first agent, and then ultimately started working with the second agent? They're really going to explore, why did that happen? In some instances, it might just be that the second agent started a new series of events. So let's say, for example, you have a buyer who's looking at property in the fall. They're working with an agent, looking at several different properties, and then it gets close to the holidays. So it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas. They tell the agent, you know what, we're going to be busy. We're going to just take a break from looking at properties right now. After the holidays, of course, we've had this horrible winter, and so they're not ready to get back in the market. Come spring, they talk to another realtor who offers to show them properties, and they begin to now work with the second realtor. And in showing that buyer properties that they might be interested in, they happen to show them a property that they saw with the first realtor. In that instance, a panel may look at the fact that the first buyer really didn't, the first agent didn't really do anything wrong. It was just that there was a break in that chain of events, and the second agent started a new chain of events that resulted in the buyer deciding to purchase that property. So that'll be one thing the panel will look at. A panel might also look at whether or not there was something that the first agent did that really caused the buyer to start working with the second agent. For example, did the first agent fail to follow up with that buyer? Did they fail to answer their questions, get them the information they wanted? Did they not return their calls, not respond to emails or their texts? And if they did that, did they really take it to the level where they abandoned that that buyer? And what the panel will also look at was, is it reasonable for the for the buyer to feel that they were abandoned? We all know there's buyers that if you don't respond to their emails by the end of that day, they're going to move on and call another realtor, and is that really reasonable? So the panel will look at that. Was there something that the first agent did that made the buyer feel that they were abandoned? Was it reasonable for them to feel abandoned and that they needed to go find another agent who could hopefully help them purchase this property? The next thing the panel might look at was, did the first agent with whom the buyer see the property with, did they somehow alienate that buyer such that it was reasonable for that buyer to take the position that they no longer wanted to work with that agent? Did they make some type of inappropriate comment, insult them in some way, make some kind of racial or ethnic slur that made that buyer think, I am not going to work with that agent? And again, was it reasonable for that buyer to feel that they no longer wanted to work with the first agent, and that they were therefore could go ahead and work with the second agent, and that second agent should be entitled to the compensation? And the final thing that the panel will look at will be whether or not timely agency disclosure took place. So let's say, for example, a buyer contacts the listing agent gets them the information, shows them the property, maybe shows them a property again. Now the buyer's ready to write an offer, and when they go to write the offer, of course, the agent will pull out the agency disclosure form, and on there they will either check that they're representing just the seller as the listing agent, or maybe they'll check that they're going to be a dual agent. If this is the very first time that that buyer is receiving any information about agency, they may take the position that they don't feel comfortable working with the listing agent, and instead that they want to go out and hire their own buyer's agent who can represent them and represent them only. So a panel may look at, did that listing agent give the buyer the consumer guide up front, discuss agency with them up front? If they did, then they may still be found to be procuring cause. But if they didn't, a panel may factor that into their decision, that their lack of disclosure regarding agency contributed to the fact that the buyer at a kind of late point in the transaction decided they needed to go find an agent who could represent them. So as you can see, there are going to be a lot of factors that a panel is going to look at to make that tough decision as to who really was the procuring cause. And there is no one factor that's going to, in and of itself, make that decision for the panel. We do have more information on Procuring Cause on our website if you're interested in it. We have a white paper on this topic. It's on our website, which is ohiorealtors.org, and it's under the legal section. I hope that's given you some explanation about Procuring Cause. I know it's a gray area and that can be frustrating for realtors, but I hope that this explanation has helped you understand why there is no one hard or fast rule, and that really a panel does need to look at all the facts and circumstances. Thanks for watching this video today, and I hope you have a very busy and prosperous spring. Thanks.